next up, I'm really pleased to invite to the stage Martin Brown, who has an amazing background that he's going to share with us. He's an educator. He's a background in media and actually produced Moulin Rouge. You guys remember that? Moulin Rouge. He was a co-producer of Romeo and Juliet, art director of Strictly Ballroom. He served as director of award courses at the Australian Film, Television, and Radio School, and he's now been developing VR training programs for emerging and established health professionals at the University of Sydney. So, very happy to have you on stage. I'm sorry you have to follow that, but I have no doubt it's going to be outstanding, and thank you for being with us all the way from down under.
Thank you. Definitely got the hardest slot in the show to follow that. So what a fantastic presentation and very powerful, moving messages. So thank you for that. I'll try and be the light relief, I guess. So I'm the co-director of the Media Lab at the Faculty of Medicine and Health at the University of Sydney. Can I ask where everyone's from? Who's from the US? Hands up. Who's not from the US? A few people. Great. Who develops content for VR? Anyone? Who's an educator? Who would describe themselves as an educator? Yeah, thank you for that. So I grew up in a sleepy town in that little place there, Tasmania, at the bottom of Australia. Where I'm from, it's actually 20 past 5 or 5:30 in the morning, so I'm trying to convince my body that I'm stayed up late for a party rather than getting up early for work. And I went to university in Hobart. I trained as a teacher, and one of the things they taught us is that education is the change in people's behaviour that results from experience. And I thought, that's a pretty tough assignment for any teacher to take on, because we know that changing people's behaviour is pretty tough. When was the last time you changed your behaviour when you learnt something? We learn a lot of stuff. Doesn't necessarily result in us changing our behaviour. So, one of the hobbies I had when I was teaching was to put on theatre shows, and eventually that passion became my job. So I started working in theatre. I suppose the thing that's interesting about that is that if you go to the theatre, as we are in a sort of theatrical setting now, you have agency. You can look around, you can look everywhere you want, but we're using the tools of theatre to direct attention this way. We're using the sound system, we're using the lights, we're using the architecture of the building to direct attention. So this is an ancient art form that's been finessed over millennia to help us share and communicate in that setting. I went to Sydney. That's what it was like back in the day, teaching. That's not me, but could have been me. I got a job at a theatre company. This was one of the plays we put on. That's actually Geoffrey Rush. I don't know if you know the actor Geoffrey Rush, before he was famous, before he won the Oscar, before he was in King's Speech and various other wonderful films. And the set for this play was designed by Catherine Martin. Catherine was a new graduate from the NIDA, the National Institute, and she was going out with a guy called Baz Luhrmann. So I started working with them on a few opera productions, and as Brendan very kindly mentioned, I worked on that one, and that one, and that one. And they did quite well. But the thing I wanted to mention about that is that, again, this is an art form that has a 130-year history and has a whole box of tricks for controlling, manipulating, directing our attention. You know, good films can do that. They can hold your attention. I've had that experience of being up late at night where you're watching a pretty corny film, but you just want to know how it ends, and you're stuck there watching a bad film until 1:30 in the morning. But really great movies can move you. They can even change how you feel about life. Some great films get etched into your memories, and you can recall scenes from them as if they were memories from your own life. And I learned a little bit about how filmmakers can do that. Obviously, one of the big, most powerful elements that we use in filmmaking is the story. So just have a look at this. Quite a famous set of 6 words. Who's seen that before? Ever seen it before? Okay. Any clues what happened in this story? Anyone? No wrong answers.
Someone brings the baby shoes back to the store.
Okay, good answer. Somebody brings the baby shoes back to the store. Any other interpretations of these words? Yep. The baby was never born. Yeah, that's a sad interpretation of the story. When you think that interpretation, was the mother on her own or was she still with her partner? You didn't think of that? Okay. Anybody else like to speculate about the context of the story? Why do babies need shoes? Very practical question. Hadn't thought of that. Okay. Okay, so the thing that's interesting to me about the 6 words on the page, what happens in the human mind, I believe, is that we are constantly looking for the opportunity to tell a story. The human mind is a storytelling organism. And we project stories into our life in order to create meaning out of what happens to us. Life is pretty random and chaotic, but somehow or another we have to shape it into things that we can hold on to. And the pattern of a story is a very ancient device that we use to help us understand this barrage of input that's coming into us. So that story is one of the very powerful tools that we use. Another one is editing. This is a very famous demonstration of what's called the Kuleshov effect, named after the guy that invented it. If we put those 2 photos together, we think that gentleman is hungry. If we put those 2 photos together, we think that gentleman is sad. We put those photos together, we think that he's got lust in his heart. Same photograph, but our mind is creating meaning across the edit of those 2 things together. This is another trick that filmmakers use. We have other techniques. You know, obviously, like theatre, we can use lighting to direct people's attention. Unlike theatre, I suppose, we can use the lens of the camera to control where we want people to look with the depth of field of the lens. And we can use all the other elements of film. We can use the performance of the actors, the design, the lighting, sound, the music. And as we say in film, the meaning is in the story, the emotion is in the music. So I'll give you an example of what I'm sort of trying to talk about today, which is, who's heard of the Mad Max films? They're pretty famous where I'm from. Do you know about those films? They're made by a guy called George Miller, who's actually Dr. George Miller. He trained as a GP, trained as a medical doctor. And he was fascinated by the physiological effect that films had on people. And so he would look at a film that he liked and he would look at how it created a roller coaster of sensations in the bodies of the people who were watching them. And so he designs his films like that. He actually designs the trajectory that he wants us physiologically to go through when we're sitting in the theatre watching his films. He maps it out first. So a good action film, it won't be non-stop action because our bodies just can't take that. It'll build up to an action sequence, then it'll fall away. We'll be given time to relax. There might even be a love story or a romance. And then there may be a shocking event that takes us by surprise. Then we'll have to recover. This is the way that you shape a successful film. So when he designs a film, he designs it physiologically first. Then he comes up with pictures that he puts against those moments. And the last thing he does is works out what the actors are going to say. So interesting to me that a medical doctor approaches something as disposable as movies, I guess, in that way. After I worked in movies for a while, I went back to teaching. There's me at the film school. One of the projects we did there actually was my first interaction with VR. This was an attempt to use storytelling in VR, which a few years ago, when we did that, was unusual and seemingly not likely to work, but we did get it to work. We developed this piece called VR Noir, which was a sort of VR Noir thriller, and it was a kind of combination of theatrical work with filmmaking work with game design. Went on to win some awards. So I suppose the reason I'm backgrounding these other media is to see how we can look at VR as a medium It's sort of the new kid on the block in terms of the long history that other media have in the pantheon. So the thing that everybody has been saying at this conference about VR is that VR is not just a better flat screen experience, it's on a whole nother level. It's a very powerful tool because it's indistinguishable physically, emotionally and intellectually from experiences we have in the real world. It can actually create memories that are indelibly etched into us as events that happen in the real world. This is a powerful weapon. This is what we talk about, the sense of presence or immersion. So my part of the VR family, I suppose, is that we're involved in some patient-facing VR applications, but a lot of training applications for frontline clinicians and undergraduate students who are going to go on to become doctors and nurses and so on. So the thing, what we find out about is, and a lot of people have commented on that, we put people in a headset, we always get oh wow. We get the oh wow experience because of the nature of the medium. That's kind of a given. In a way, that's almost the easy part to VR. It's such a potent medium that that's the response we're going to get. I suppose the thing that I'm interested in is that the harder part is how do you actually analyze a real-world problem, a real-world disease, a real-world training opportunity, and how do you specifically create the VR experience you want that's going to change people's behaviour in the way that is your objective. That's the thing that's interesting to us. So I'm going to, let's see where I am with the slides. Oh, that's the University of Sydney where I work. Looks a bit like Hogwarts. So I'm going to talk about, apologise for people who saw Nathan's talk, my colleague. I'll be covering a little bit of the same ground because we're working on the same project. So I just wanted to tell you about one example of the work that we've done. We're asked to look at the escalating problem of violence in the emergency departments. I'm sure it's an issue here. It certainly is an issue back home. Everyone I've talked to has the same issue. So we stood in the emergency department of 4 hospitals for hours and hours and hours, took notes. We interviewed 40 people who'd been frontline staff who'd been involved in Code Blacks. Everybody we talked to in emergency had been assaulted at least once in the past year. And so, yes, certainly an escalating problem. And so from that, we developed a thematic analysis of all of the issues we were facing, and we started to go to work on how we could potentially add some value to that problem. So the thing we found out is that violent episodes occasionally come out of nowhere, but mostly they follow a pattern. This is the sort of pattern that it happens. Obviously, people in the emergency department, nearly all of them, they're there, it's one of the worst days of their life, they're in pain, they're confused perhaps, distracted, and because of the stress that the health system is under, I've spoken to a few people here, it sounds like your health system is in as much crisis as ours, they're being kept waiting for a long period of time. So most people get through it. Most people have great resilience and forbearance and they get through it. Some people get triggered and they kick off. And so it escalates to violence. And it goes through that sort of a pattern. And hospital frontline medical staff need to deal with this. If somebody is going to get violent, they need to work out how to intervene. And there are practices and procedures involved in dealing with that. It may be that they have to actually be physically and chemically restrained. So what we noticed is that frontline medical staff, and I've spoken to a few people here who have a similar experience. If you've been working in the ED for 5 years, you develop, through the School of Hard Knocks, you develop this uncanny sense that somebody is exhibiting behaviour. I've been talking to medical staff in the ED and they'll say, excuse me, and they'll just leave and go over and deal with someone because they've picked up that that person is starting to exhibit some of those early sorts of behaviours that can lead to violence. They might be staring at the staff, they might be sitting very big on the chair, they might be jiggling their arms, they might be muttering under their breath. There's a whole lot of signs that a novice entrant to the profession doesn't necessarily pick up on, but experienced people pick up on. And this notion of nipping it in the bud is the best preventative strategy for dealing with that. So we also found that when a physical takedown has to occur, this is something quite violent. 6 or 7 people grab hold of somebody and wrestle to them to the ground, usually inject some heavy drugs into their thigh to knock them out. If you haven't witnessed one of those things, that's quite something to see. And very often the first time our students saw it was on the job. So, and they reported to us that was quite confronting. So we were involved in developing a training program or adding supplementary VR elements to a new training program. We analysed all of those data that we got from our study and started to look at where the access points were, where VR could maybe make a difference. We felt that our role was to try to get our students, our graduating students, a bit of a jump start on these skills that established professionals already had. So we wanted to accelerate their acquisition of these professional skill sets. One of the ones was this one I've been talking about, this sort of uncanny sense, or seemingly uncanny sense of intuition that the veterans had. And that was really about situational awareness. It was really about being aware of being able to differentiate between a patient who's just unwell, who's in pain, who may be groaning, but differentiating that patient to someone who's starting to exhibit some of those precursor behaviours that I mentioned. So we wanted to give our students a rehearsal in that act of noticing, or that situational awareness piece. So, and again, I'm recapping some of Nathan's talk, but we took over an ED. We're very fortunately, they just built a new hospital in the precinct. There's now 3 hospitals there instead of 2 in the precinct. Just before it opened, we got to take over the ED, and we hired actors and put the 360 video camera in the middle of the bay, and we had the actors slowly get more aggressive. So we taught them all of this stuff about what those things look like, and we got them to act up, basically. And so the task for our new entrants is to notice and to calibrate their professional judgment against what is a behaviour of concern and what is just a behaviour that is usual, not normal, but usual in the emergency department. And so that way we like to think we helped calibrate their professional judgment. We also videoed in 360 video a takedown. It was very interesting to do that. We needed to work with everybody in the ED in order to overhaul the protocols to get it up to gold standard. So they actually retrained themselves in order for us to put it on camera because they wanted to have an exemplar. One of the things about the power of this is that we had an actor, a very fine actor, engaged to do this, who the actor, his part-time job was being an orderly in a hospital. So he'd seen it all, his perfect casting, in fact. He'd seen it all, and it was spookily accurate how well he pretended to be someone who needed to be sedated. So we're very fortunate in casting him. But the power of it is a few things. 360 video, it's photorealistic. You're standing right next to it. And the performance of the actors, but also the audio. You know, we're using some of the filmmaking tricks here to make sure this is a highly impactful piece of work. One of the things that Nathan has taught me, my colleague, is that when we're working in this space, what we would like to do is to make the training environment as close as possible to the practice environment as possible. Because frontline medical work, you're on your feet, it's a very active, engaged job. We want to train people in a way that emotionally, physically, they are going to recognise when that crisis occurs in the workplace. It's not the sort of thing that where textbook training necessarily helps. So this is obviously where VR is valuable in terms of being able to reproduce otherwise very difficult environments that you can't routinely reproduce a takedown in the class. It's just not practical to have those highly skilled professionals off roster to come into the classroom. We had, again, our wonderful actor and some veterans showing us exemplars of how to do verbal de-escalation. But the funnest one we developed was our conversational agent. This is Louis. He's run by ChatGPT, and you talk to him in the headset, and if you say compassionate things, he calms down and the exercise finishes. If you say inflammatory things, he gets upset and the game finishes, and then you get feedback on how you did. The fastest person to get him to 100% of upset was a psychiatrist. I don't know what that means. Although Louis is not photographically real, and there's a slight lag when you speak to him because it has to do a lot of language processing, what people report is that they feel like they're on the spot. They're in the headset, they have to make a decision. They have to form a sentence to speak to Louis. They maybe have to bite their tongue when he's swearing at them. They have to actually find a way to negotiate with Louis. So that's another way that we feel that we're giving our students a rehearsal of the skill set that they need. So, running a little bit behind time, so I might just skip through a couple of things. Yeah, so we're rolling that program out in training programs in Western Sydney at the moment. I'll just jump through ALS because Nathan's already spoken about that. That's another one of our apps. I suppose the thing that I wanted to talk to you about today is that with this new medium that we have, this very powerful, very potent medium of virtual reality, we're at a position now where we should be able to be very specific about what we want our experiences to do in the VR headset. And I'm fortunate that I've studied and worked in theatre, which has an ancient tradition of communicating the content that we want to create in a very nuanced way. The same with filmmaking. Filmmaking has a 130-year history of developing very precise language sets around how we develop and build experiences that are engaging for audiences, like George Miller does with Mad Max. So in our work in VR, I feel like there are lessons we can learn in terms of how specific we can be. The AI revolution that's happening almost daily at the moment gives us the opportunity to create bespoke environments for each of our patients. So how do we choose? How do we just choose what to prescribe? If we're creating a mindfulness app, is it enough to listen to the library of free music that we can access online and just pick a piece of music that sounds good? One of the colleagues I work with did her PhD. She's a composer, but she's working in health with us now. She created a suite of music which is prescribable. So she has worked very hard, and her whole study was about the idea that some music has a calming effect, some music has an effect of catharsis. Which piece of music should we prescribe for our patients? So is it enough to give patients the choice of their own playlist? Is that the beneficial outcome that we want? Or should we be, as physicians, prescribing the piece of music that has a therapeutic effect? That's a different level of relationship to the app that we're creating. So I guess what I wanted to say today is that we have this emerging medium of virtual reality. We have enormous tools available. We have all of the tools and more that we had available in theatre, film, and even game design. The thing, of course, that's different with VR is that the person there has agency, but agency can be directed and can be influenced. And so I guess the point that I was hoping to make for you today, with you today, is that as long as we can keep on developing the richness of language that we use to specify the VR experiences we want our patients and our trainees to have, the better we're going to be able to deliver them. So thank you for your time.